people know about who Peter Parker is, how he has to be, and then Spider-Man. You know, there are two different personalities. How did you come up with yours? You said you had the idea for the voice.
That was the voice. That's the voice that was in my head the whole time when I was reading the comics. I mean, reading so much of the comics and even consuming some of the cartoons and all of that, like you kind of tend to put all that together and make it into your own Peter Parker. Like I love Peter when he is more of a loner, because when he has to depend more upon himself, because it just makes it that much more tragic when he tries to reach out to other people, but then he can't because he puts them in danger and he blames himself for Uncle Ben.
I want to be in love, but the person again, all those things.
Right. So it makes more interesting character dynamics to me when that's the situation versus him having all kinds of support groups and friends and people that know his identity. Like, it's too much help. You know, I feel like in order for Peter Parker to work, he's got to be kind of going at it alone.
When I was a kid, I would watch the film Spider-Man 3 basically every day. It was my favorite movie. I absolutely adored the character of Spider-Man and everything that was in his world. Spider-Man was probably the first piece of fiction I really got into. So I got everything Spider-Man. Spider-Man toys, Spider-Man stuffed animals, Spider-Man PJs, and fucking bed sheets. And one day that I remember kind of fondly, I was in the Dollar General with my grandma as a little dumbass kid. And I was browsing the DVDs looking at the Batman copies I already had when I saw it. The Spectacular Spider-Man. They made a cartoon of Spidey too? I was so excited, immediately grabbed that shit and got it. I was excited the whole way home. The entire car ride I just sat and stared at this new DVD. 3 episodes that would change how I viewed the character forever. Hopefully with this video we'll be able to convince you that the Spectacular Spider-Man was great from the very beginning. And yes, I say we, because there's no way I could tackle this all alone. Today I'm calling on the help of a fellow essayist, Gabriel Oliver. He's got a great channel that I highly implore you check out, especially if you like video essays and analysis videos. But if you came here just because you like Spider-Man, then don't worry, he's got you covered there too. Those videos will be linked below alongside with his channel. But a huge thank you to Gabriel for joining me on this video. Let's get right into why this show has aged so damn well.
If there's one thing people know about me, it's that I love Spider-Man, maybe a bit too much, although you lot don't know me, so here's my opening statement. I love Spider-Man, and out of that love, I've consumed hundreds, probably thousands of hours of Spider-Man content over my 17 years. From video games to TV shows to card games to fan films. And if I've realised one thing watching all of that stuff, is that the start of your Spider-Man story is one of the most important things. I'd argue more important in Spider-Man's case than most other superheroes. And no show or story I know highlights that more than Spectacular Spider-Man's first episode. For starters, writer Greg Weisman and director Victor Cook immediately show their understanding of Spider-Man, specifically the Spider-Man they want to show us. The quippy but not annoying, slightly out of his depth kid, who's capable but still a bit unaware and learning the ropes. This is highlighted brilliantly with a spider signal which he drops soon after in the show. He's still trying to figure out all of this, which is a theme that's explored for the entire show, what it means to be Spider-Man, and it's phenomenally and expertly established in the first scene, alongside 4 of the most commonly reoccurring villains, Sandman and Ryder at the bank heist so that they don't have their superpowers yet, and Hammerhead and the Big Man watching from afar. It's genius and done in a way that's digestible and simple, although understanding Spider-Man is one thing, the thing Weisman and Cook really want to show us that they understand Peter Parker. And they show us this fact not just in this episode, but the very intro of the show. Not only is Peter shown first and Spidey last in the intro, but Spidey is shown with a smaller uncapitalized font, while Peter and his supporting cast all get capital lettering in a larger font. The writers are literally spelling out their philosophy for writing the show in the opening. To make a good Spider-Man show, you have to make a great Peter Parker show. And they prove this to us with this great scene. We establish quickly that Uncle Ben is already gone and that the house is having money problems, as well as just how much Peter cares about his aunt. He's willing to embarrass himself, if only slightly, to keep the mood high. Peter right now is at a point of trying to force himself to keep the lesson his uncle taught him in mind, the lesson that we all know, great power, great responsibility, close to himself. Although, as we'll see a little bit in this episode, but throughout the rest of the show, it's one he struggles with. And that's one of the reasons I think that this Peter Parker in particular is one of the best ones put to screen. In the next scene with Peter, Gwen and Harry hanging out, Peter gets overconfident. He just spent an entire summer living as a Spider-Man that, aside from at the start, has been nothing but fun. Being a superhero and helping people against criminals that barely pose any kind of threat to him. So he gets confident and asks out a girl who is so far out of his league, and then gets ridiculed for it. A story that might be a little bit too relatable for some people out there, but in Peter's words, a minor setback. He's still living with his head mostly in the clouds, something reaffirmed by his teacher giving an internship with Kurt Collars. Someone vitally important in these opening few episodes for reasons we'll go into later. But also with his friend Eddie Brock, who we know is super close with Peter just from a few lines of dialogue implying a past rather than spending all the time showing and telling it. That comes much later in this series, towards the end actually, and it isn't relevant at the start here. All this stuff and loads of other things that aren't really going to be mentioned in these videos, like how phenomenally Norman and Harry's involvement in the series is set up here to be continued down the line, or just how great the writing is of Gwen and Flash. It's all just set up for later, though it's phenomenal, expertly crafted setup. But the meat and bones of this episode comes from the Vulture. Someone gifted and smart like Peter is, but someone who, in Peter's own words, never learned the great responsibility lesson Peter did. He's petty and vengeful, and that's why he needs to be stopped. But because these writers are actual gods, that would be way too easy. So on top of that, we get the introduction of the big man's larger involvement. And also the show's start of throwing Spidey out of his more comfortable normal criminal route and into more and more superpowered encounters. It's fantastically handled execution, with the first Vulture encounter being just Spidey and Toomes, and the second one bringing in this third party. It's a great setup for all of Spidey's conflict in the episode, and the way that he resolves it is perfect too. But what about Peter's? Well, in response to the money issues and his slight naivety, Peter tries to get a job at the Daily Bugle with some previously established photography skills. And on top of that, Peter gets given a 10 PM curfew thanks to a Spider-Man-ing worrying Aunt May, but also setting up a writing device that will be used in the next few episodes. Overall, this episode should be taught in universities for how brilliantly you start spinning all the plates that will continue spinning 20 episodes from now. The big man, Harry and Norman, Peter starting room to grow, Connors, Flash, Eddie, the Muddy Pollers, the Bugle, Gwen, and so much more. While not all of these things are explored as much as everything else in the episode, the fact that a pilot could establish all of these, even if most of it is surface level to be expanded upon later, it all makes this world feel so incredibly alive and filled with people, not writing devices or villains there to just fill a spot, an episode in a week. There's a reason this show has stood the test of time like no other Spider-Man show, and in microcosm, this pilot shows all of it. But starting to spin the plates is one thing, keeping them spinning is a whole other ordeal.
Episode 2 of The Spectacular Spider-Man is very special to me, not just nostalgia-wise, but it's also the main reason that Electro is my favorite Spider-Man villain. I know that's a little controversial to say. A lot of people think the character is rather lackluster, and he's often criticized for his inconsistencies. There's like a million different Electro adaptations, but not one definitive version if that tells you anything about the character.
Remember me.
I've always loved him, and episode 2 entitled Interactions is why. So let me take you on a quick journey down memory lane, as I discuss why I love this episode so damn much. So allow me to tell you the tragic tale of Max Dillon, aka Electro.
None of you get it without a cure. I'm not Max Dillon. I'm... what'd you call me? Lightning Butt? No, not that. Electro. Yeah. I'm Electro!
The episode opens in Kurt Connor's lab as he gives a brief lecture to Peter and his friends.
In nature, everything is connected. As scientists, we explore and expand upon those connections.
The first 3 episodes all follow a biology theme, survival of the fittest being the introduction of the Vulture, a representation of the corrupt people who will want to hunt down Peter and hurt him, predators who will try to make him their prey. The third episode, Natural Selection, introducing the Lizard and showing Peter that sometimes things happen to people for no apparent reason, but that's not an excuse to give up on them. In this episode, Interactions, introduces Electro and reminds Peter that not everyone had an Uncle Ben in their life, not everyone had that helping hand growing up, and it's his responsibility as a superhero to be that helping hand to others. At this point in the series, Peter has nothing but bad luck, leaving him to believe that he has it worse off than most people do. He has no job, no money, not many friends, and he's constantly harassed and bullied. He finds solace in beating the criminals at night for this reason. Peter is so often talked down to and belittled that he often takes what he has for granted. He doesn't always recognize how great his friends are, because he's always focused on how harsh his enemies are.
Are you damaged? He did.
He can't even make it to school on time, as shown by this dope-ass intro that contains several references to Spider-Man 2, and now he has to tutor the girlfriend of his biggest bully. Great. There's so much going wrong in Peter's life that he'd never even consider someone like Max, and what he could be going through.
Max, I promise you, it's only temporary. We'll begin work on a cure immediately.
Least you can do.
Try to rest.
We're introduced to Max in the first scene of the episode. He's presented as this cool, super lax guy who's easy to get along with, but he makes one mistake and changes his life forever. He wakes up in the hospital different. The man he once was is now completely gone, all from one incident, like the one incident Peter had, where he was randomly bit by a spider and gifted unimaginable power. He sees these powers as a burden, but soon learns there's much worse burdens that one can bear. Much worse. Max is completely destroyed by the events. He flips shit on Eddie and runs away to get some coffee.
Daddy, what's he wearing?
Shh. And what are you staring at?
I was just waiting for your order.
Coffee!
He learns he can't even enjoy simple luxuries like coffees anymore, and he can't handle it. He has an outrage and starts shattering light bulbs unintentionally. Peter happens to be at the same coffee shop attempting to tutor Liz. He overhears the commotion and decides to trail Max as he flees the scene. Peter knows Max personally, but he doesn't recognize him. All he sees is another thug, an opportunity to vent his anger and also make a quick buck with some pictures. He immediately attacks Max. He doesn't even try to talk to him or help him. He just immediately assumes he's a criminal. This is a habit that Peter will learn to grow out of. Villains like Max Dillon and Flint Marko show him that things aren't as black and white as he thinks they are. Max is quickly angered by Peter's antics and haphazardly uses his powers to fend him off. Max flees the scene again and tries to return home, but before he can enter, he's confronted by the doctor and a few officers. They try to convince Max to calm down. They try to get him to return to the hospital, but he won't. At this point, he's completely broken. He's watched his life get destroyed and was publicly humiliated in the same evening. And now, after all that, is someone offering to help him? He doesn't accept it. Now completely filled with rage, he returns to Connor's lab with a vengeance. Here we see how Peter's on the complete opposite spectrum to Max at the moment. He's actually doing pretty well. His internship seems to be going good, and he's even connecting with Liz finally. As the group shows Liz the beauty of science, Connor resides in his office, hiding away his secret. Connors is clearly suffering in silence for the first few episodes. He's clearly considering some drastic measures to get his arm back. And I think it's after this night, after he sees what Max has become, that he stops caring himself. Max arrives and he blames his friends for not being able to save him. Peter finally recognizes him. He sees the man he once knew and what he's now become. And it all makes sense to him in that moment. Max wasn't just some thug. He was alone and scared, like Peter was so long ago. He adopts his Spider-Man persona in hopes of reaching Max. He tries to save him. He tries to stop him from giving in to his demons. The same demons Peter battles every day. But Max is too far gone. Max is beyond saving. He might have been able to help him before, but now he's completely gone. He's just another criminal for Peter to stop now.
Electro.
I love this fight scene. Electro is such a visually interesting villain, and it's also super fun to see Peter desperately try to get pictures of his fight. And Aunt May calling him to lecture him mid-battle is just hilarious to me. Also, how does one fight an Electricity Man? This battle really shows Peter's ingenuity, as the only reason he's able to beat him is by using this random glove he remembered was at the lab. Peter eventually gets the upper hand. We watch as Max plummets slowly into the pool below, his anger and frustration reaching its fullest as he falls, feeling betrayed and abandoned by those he loves. We watch a good man plummet straight into the world of crime that would soon become his life. And this ends the tragic origin story of Electro, one of Spider-Man's most underrated and tragic villains. And after all of this, Peter has to return to school and continue his normal day-to-day life, constantly thinking of those less fortunate than him, and constantly being dismissed by his peers as a coward when he was one of the only people who really tried to help. This episode is a classic Peter Parker story. It perfectly captures the harsh realities of Peter's life, while shining a light on his personal weaknesses. The villain is extremely tragic, and also directly ties into something that Peter deals with personally, the burden of great power. I honestly love this episode, and it's the reason I love the character of Electro so much. This episode also perfectly continues Peter's arc, and the character arcs of everyone around him. These aren't just one-off characters, they're real humans with actual lives. Survival of the Fittest and Interactions both deliver incredible Spider-Man narratives that remain true to the character and also feel wholly unique at the same time. They established from the start that this show isn't just another silly cartoon. It's a long-form animated drama with very serious consequences and subjects. This episode really shows the darker side of Peter's world and the darker sides of Peter as a person. It also does an amazing job setting up the third episode. Another complete masterpiece. Natural Selection is the third and final episode we'll be covering today, and it's probably the darkest one too.
Peter and Mike Search's Spidey's place in this episode is brilliant. For one, just like in episode 1, Peter is still learning what it means to be Spider-Man. He's still trying to find uses for the spider signal, and now he's even made some calling cards. But in direct contrast to episode 1, Peter's life is going relatively well. In his own words, he's making all the right moves. And in deliberate irony for the geniuses behind this show, this will be the episode in which Peter makes the least amount of correct moves, arguably in the entire show.
We see Dr. Connors' final transformation into the Lizard in this episode, and it's kinda crazy that it's handled better than an entire fucking movie. This episode is really what sets the tone for the series going forward. This is easily Peter's toughest battle yet, as he's not only tested physically or morally, he's also tested mentally, as he's forced to take down his mentor and confront the consequences of his actions, as they all seem to pile up at once. This is the first time Peter really questions if being Spider-Man was ever worth it.
But we're shown after the intro that Peter was doing everything for the right reasons. He's trying desperately for 2 episodes now to try and get pictures of the Bugle contest. All so he can help his Aunt May pay off just some of the bills, and he's willing to get into trouble for it. And in this episode more than most, we really see how far Peter Parker has to get dragged through the mud in order to do the right thing. After this point, Peter gets credit for coming up with the idea for the gene cleanser, and that's it. That's all the credit that he gets for doing the right thing. The rest of the episode becomes about Spider-Man saving the day. And that's an extremely deliberate choice from the crew. Story editor Greg Reisman, supervisor director but also writer the pilot Victor Cook, writer of this episode Matt Rain, and director Dave Bullock all deserve huge amounts of props for pacing this episode so well.
Connors sits in his bathroom. His home is dark and barely colored, making it feel quite uneasy. He sits and ponders. He knows his experiments are dangerous. He knows the lizard DNA could be detrimental, but the question is if he really cares or not. Peter and all his villains become the way they are due to things that burden their lives. Toombs had to live with the idea that Norman Osborn stole his work and won't be giving any credit. Max has the sudden burden of extreme power he never asked for and was unfit to wield. And Connors is burdened by the loss of his arm, his physical impairment. It's never directly stated in the series how he lost his arm, but it's made apparent from the moment that he's introduced that it's something that haunts him every day. Despite everything he does for society, he still feels incomplete. Like a detective who never solves that one case. Like an author who never gets to tell their dream story, Kurt feels like a failure. He will never recognize his own success when he's constantly reminded of what he considers to be his biggest failure. He takes the serum and immediately feels the effects. His eyes shift and his body trembles. He eventually gathers the strength and leaves the bathroom, as if nothing ever happened. Kurt is such a great mentor for Peter because he basically is Peter. They're both unbridled geniuses only held back by themselves, and they both constantly overlook the good parts of their lives, the friends they have, the good they do, and the people who love them. They have a tendency to forget how good their lives can be because they're always battling their own minds. As the night goes on, Kurt becomes restless. He's sweating profusely and hyperventilating. Eventually, he's overcome by the serum.
Kurt, what is it?
It actually worked. His entire life has been building to this one moment. His life's biggest burden has been destroyed, and he feels unstoppable. That night they all celebrate Kurt's success, all failing to realize a much worse burden has taken the place of his old one, and it's already too late.
What?
They spend the next several hours trying to predict what's happening and hopefully prevent it before it's too late. It's clear though that Kurt is struggling. He's in severe pain and he can't keep his composure. Eventually the pain becomes too much for him to bear. The birth of the lizard is an extremely tragic but terrifying moment. We see this character we've come to care about and respect be reduced into a feral monster.
Connors becomes a lizard just over 10 minutes in, and that worked because of all the work the writers have done for his character beforehand. And the same goes tenfold for Spidey. We feel the absence of Peter compared to the previous 2 episodes, as he has to lethargically fight on and on in his toughest and closest battle so far. His quips feel really desperate, and even though this show doesn't really push to the horror movie levels of the new animated series Spider-Man show before this, it's still tense and engaging and fantastic.
The Lizard is my second favorite Spider-Man villain, and that's due to how well this show handles the source material. Connors attacks his friends and flees from the lab, disappearing into the night. Kurt has made his way into the subway station and begins harassing the civilians, showing that the Beast has completely taken over. What follows is an amazing fight sequence that begins in the subway station and ends on the back of a train. After losing severely, Peter returns to the lab. Here he finds that the rest of the group developed a cure while he was gone, and he heroically offers to track down Kurt and stop him before he can hurt anyone else. Eddie follows into the zoo, causing the two to have to team up. Eddie leads the Lizard to a cold water pit where Peter's able to get the drop on him. This final battle is very important, as not only is it the finale to Kurt's character arc as the Lizard, it's also the end of Peter's character arc for the beginning of the series. All the lessons he learned over the course of these 3 episodes are suddenly piled on top of him. The question is, can he handle the responsibility? At this point, it's clear that Connors is far too gone. The monster that has haunted him his whole life has taken form. He's become the thing he's always feared. This fight is pretty emotional to watch. We have to see Kurt violently attack one of his closest friends without even realizing it. And we also see Peter have to take on his mentor. Not only does he need to stop this violent beast, he also needs to save his friend.
Even with the floatiness of the show's earlier fight scenes, the choreography shows how much of an uphill battle this is for Spidey. He's constantly out of his depth physically, and in the end he can only win with his smarts by putting Connors in cold water and using Billy's skateboard. It's only his smarts to get him through this, something that's going to be a running theme in the future of the show.
He returns to his normal self, suppressing the monster once again. In this moment, him and Peter both learn that there's some things you can't change about yourself. No matter how hard you fight or how far you run, you can never truly change who you are. Kurt bitterly accepts this truth, saying goodbye to his arm and his dream. Forever. But Peter still isn't ready to process something like that.
And at the end, we get one of the best Spider-Man speeches put to screen, at least in my opinion.
Spider-Man's no magic wand, but thanks to the webhead, Kurt's cured, and Billy gets his father back. So what if nobody threw a parade? Spidey stays because Spidey's needed. For now, anyway.
He's given the opportunity to cure himself, to say goodbye to the responsibility he never asked for, but he can't. At least not for now.
Peter, and by extension this whole episode, do such a fantastic job at explaining and exploring the phrase great power, great responsibility. Peter saved a family today, 2 if you include the money Aunt May got, but to do those almost unarguable goods, he lost his job and all of the respect of several important figures in his life. Peter did the right thing but still got hurt, and he still keeps going anyway, cause that's Spider-Man. He's not a superhero who beats up every villain. We saw how that didn't work with Electro. He's not the hero who's fantastically went off. From his 10 PM curfew to his poor luck with all of his picture attempts, he's the hero who does things he shouldn't have to, but he still does. He still compromised his most important friendships because he knew Spidey was better here than Peter. He still ruined friendships and his internship in his dream field because it meant relieving a bit of stress from his aunt's shoulders. It's depressing and tragic to really dive into, but honestly we can all learn from this. One thing this show has made clear is that Peter is flawed, extremely so. From his mistakes at school in the first episode, to Mac's last episode, to his mistakes here, to the many mistakes he'll continue to make. But he keeps learning, and keeps getting slightly better from it. Spider-Man is a better hero now than he was at the start, and that's a shift that continues to the rest of the show. So, be like Spider-Man. Learn from your mistakes as best as you can, but also accept that you can't fix them. Electro stays a villain from now on, and Peter never gets this job back. But more good is done by Peter moving on and staying stuck in these moments. Peter being a better friend to Harry, helping Aunt May, stopping Venom and the Sinister Six. All things that happened in this season, and undoubtedly because the lessons Peter had to learn here.
Peter still has much to learn, and learn he shall, as this is only the beginning of a journey of love, friends, family, self-discovery, a journey of great power and great responsibility. I love this show. I've loved it since the day I got the DVD in the store. I hope that with this video we were able to convince you that the spectacular Spider-Man has been great from the very beginning. Thank you so much for watching, and another huge thank you to Gabriel Oliver for joining me in this video. You guys should definitely check out his channel. If you like my content at all, you'll definitely like his. This is easily one of my favorite videos I've ever made, and I couldn't have done it without Gabriel, so go watch his stuff immediately. Anyway, that's basically it. I really hope you guys enjoyed the video, we worked really hard on it. Link to Gabriel's channel will be in the description below.